Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walker Reads. I am your host, MJ Walker. Today, I'll be bringing you the next installation in the series Rabinoe, Wizard Extraordinaire. If you enjoy what you are watching and listening to, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It truly helps me to develop my channel. Now, without further ado, I bring you the next episode in Rabinoe, Wizard Extraordinaire. Episode 19, Royal Proclamation. "Mr. Jenkins," the king cooed. "Oh, how long I've been waiting to meet you." The words fell on Rabinoe heavily, adding to his already amped up anxiety. This man knew his surname, something Rabinoe had hoped to leave far in the past, and his stomach turned thinking of what else the king could know about him. This meeting was as far from fair as it could be. Rabinoe knew next to nothing of the man sitting on the throne. The only information that he could recall was the fervent warning Linrem had given him to stay away from the royal family. A fat lot of good that had done him, with Dirkly slithering through the shadows to catch him unawares. Rabinoe swallowed his irritation at being forced into this encounter and set his jaw defiantly. "I wish I could say the same, sir," Rabinoe said as respectfully as he could muster. "Sadly, I do not know why you had your lapdog drag me here, nor why I am here at all. Furthermore, I am quite embarrassed to say that I don't even know your name." "Sir," Rabinoe added hastily when the guards narrowed their eyes and the king raised an eyebrow at him. Rabinoe wasn't about to grovel to this man, but clearly he had no choice but to be as respectful as possible, and for the young will mage, that was a monumental effort. "The first two parts are easy," the king said with a gleam in his eyes. "I wanted to talk to you. Roan here is a dedicated servant of mine and desires nothing more than to see my every whim and wish carried to fruition." "My king," Dirkly answered, almost as if on cue, bowing deeply once more. "The last part can be a little dicey," the king said, stroking at his chin. "Needless to say, my title as king should be more than enough of a descriptor for the common man. However, seeing as you stand before me, perhaps a little more is in order." The king stood, walking down the stairs of the dais regally. He reached the bottom, standing before Rabinoe. "I," he said, putting a hand to his chest, "am King Lance E. Lotterell." He turned his hand and put it to Rabinoe's chest. "And you will show me the respect I am due." Without warning, a powerful blast of energy slammed into Rabinoe's chest, sending him flying backwards to tumble across the gilded floor. He landed in a heap halfway down the hall, with his head ringing and his senses reeling. The king snapped his fingers, and the nearest guards grabbed Rabinoe under each arm and hauled him back to the foot of the dais, depositing him unceremoniously on the ground. The king had already stalked back up the steps and was settling himself back into his throne. "Enough of your insolent questions, boy," King Lotterell snapped. "It's time for some answers." Rabinoe shook his head, fighting to banish the daze that had come over him with the unexpected blast. He struggled to his knees, and when he tried to stand up fully, the look on Dirkly's face, as well as a low hiss from Eris, told him it would be best to stay prostrated. He looked up at the king, nodding slowly to show that he had heard the man. "Good," the king cooed. "Now," he began, tenting his fingers before his chest, "I am well aware that you have been under the tutelage of one Linrem Cestial." He paused for effect. "A will mage of notable power and renown." King Lance leaned forward in his throne. "Where is your master now, boy?" Rabinoe felt a stab deep in his chest as Linrem was brought up. He looked to Eris, who nodded nearly imperceptibly. "My master is dead," Rabinoe answered somberly. The king nodded towards one of the guards, who promptly swatted Rabinoe across the shoulders with the haft of his spear, smacking his face into the gilded floor, hard. "That is the second time I have warned you to show me the respect I deserve, boy," the king said dangerously. "There will be no third." Rabinoe groaned, sitting back on his knees once more, nodding. "Yes, my king." "Good boy," the king smiled maliciously. "You say Linrem is dead. How did this happen?" Rabinoe swallowed hard, remembering the magic concussions he and Eris had felt all the way from the pine grove. "Sir," Rabinoe began slowly, keeping his eyes on the steps in front of him, "Eredin came to the chateau and battled him. It is unclear how the battle itself played out. However, the outcome was the death of my master. We found his body when we returned to the chateau, my king." "Eredin!" the king shouted. "In Galita! This is an outrage! Dirkly!" The man bowed his head once more. "Yes, my liege. Tell me this boy is lying." "It grieves me deeply to say that he is correct, my king," Dirkly said. "When I arrived at the location where the chateau should have been, I found nothing but grass and fading energy signatures. One of them belonged to Eredin." "What do you mean?" the king asked in a tone full of danger. "Where the chateau should have been." "My lord," Dirkly said, "the entire chateau has vanished, leaving no sign that it was ever there to begin with." The king's eyes narrowed angrily, and his gaze fell upon Rabinoe once more. "Boy," he commanded, "what has happened to the Twilight Chateau?" Rabinoe felt a cold sweat break out across his body. "My king," he began, "I'm sorry, but I do not know. It was Linrem's magic that made the place disappear." "A likely story," the king growled. "And how is it that you didn't vanish with it? I see even the famed eternal cat seemed to have been spared by this fate." "Sir," Rabinoe answered, "I was charged to embark upon a pilgrimage. The orders were in Linrem's last will and testament, and Eris was charged with guiding me. Once we set foot outside of the chateau to begin our journey, the place disappeared behind us. My king," Rabinoe said, bowing his head, "I swear this to be the truth." The king stared down at them for a long moment before he spoke. "How convenient," he said darkly. "The strongest will mage of his time dies, and the treasure trove of goods and knowledge he has stored in his home simply vanishes." King Lance leaned forward in his throne. "How does one gain access to Twilight Chateau, boy?" "Gain access, my lord?" Rabinoe asked, taken aback by the question. "I don't even know where the place went, let alone how to get into it." "You're telling me," the king continued, the tone of danger back in his voice, "that Linrem charged you two to embark on a pilgrimage and left no way for his own apprentice to gain access to what was left behind?" "If I may, your majesty," Eris spoke. The king nodded at her, and she continued. "Linrem feared the frenzy that may have come with everyone learning of his death. Surely the entire chateau would have been plundered by greedy citizens, hoping to find something they could profit off of. Linrem wasn't exactly unheard of. People knew who he was and where he lived. It was only a matter of time before people like Dirkley here came looking. Lynn did the one thing he could think of to keep his stores of magical wares and knowledge safe. He removed them from this realm of existence. Are you implying that the chateau has been destroyed? The king growled. No, your majesty, Eris continued. It has been suspended in place, somewhere between this realm and the next. How do I get inside? The king snapped. With all due respect, my lord, Eris said with a savage gleam in her eyes. You don't. The king stood in irritation, pacing along the top of the dais in front of his throne. He paced back and forth several times before he stopped, turning to face the area behind the throne. Mordred, he called out, and a moment later, a pale, middle-aged man, swathed in crimson robes, emerged from a door hidden off to the side. He was much shorter than the king, and his black hair was thinning to the point of baldness. He wore horn-rimmed glasses and a beard that seemed to have stolen the hair from his head, though it was neatly tended and reached down to his navel. The mage knelt before the king, bowing deeply. You called, my lord, he said in a gravelly voice. Mordred, the king repeated. These two have claimed Twilight Chateau has shimmered from existence, suspended between realms. Is that even possible? The man's head snapped up in surprise, eyes wide. Suspended between realms? The whole of the chateau? That is what I said, Mordred, the king snapped. My lord, the man croaked, I am deeply sorry for my insolence. You merely surprised me with this information. Is it possible? The king asked slowly, dangerously. The man, Mordred, swallowed hard. I am afraid such a thing is indeed possible, my lord. It is unheard of for such a large-scale structure to be moved in such a way. However, the mage Linrem was well known for doing the unheard of and the impossible. The king swore loudly. How do I gain access? Gain access, my lord? Mordred asked. Such a thing is not possible. In every sense, the place no longer exists. Where in time and space it is suspended would need to be known first. Then a great deal of powerful incantations would be needed to anchor it back in our world. That is something that I am woe to say is beyond my capacities as a mage. The king roared in anger. Begone, mage, he snarled, before I vent my frustration at your incompetence. I live to serve, Mordred said, bowing deeply again and backing quickly from the room. The king paced once more, rage painted clearly all over his features. After a moment, he seemed to gain control over his emotions, the mask of cool regality settling back into place. He sat upon the throne and looked down upon them coldly. Fine, then, he said bitterly. Twilight Chateau is effectively gone. For now. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at Rabinoe. That just leaves you, Mr. Jenkins. Rabinoe swallowed hard, sensing the king was about to say something he would not like. He stayed quiet, however, bowing his head and awaiting the king's words. As you may or may not know, King Lance began, will magic is an incredibly fickle and dangerous art. It has great power and potential, yet it cuts like a double-edged sword. Those who are not wary of its edge are easily cut by it. So, in order to make Alita safer for everyone, the royal family has long since placed those that practice will magic under tight scrutiny. He paused, looking down at Rabinoe with a twinkle in his eyes. Did you know, Mr. Jenkins, that it is a crime to practice will magic without the sanction of the crown? Rabinoe felt his stomach drop clear through the floor beneath him. No, my king, Rabinoe said slowly. I was unaware of those stipulations. Rogue mages, those that choose to practice their craft outside of the purview of the crown, the king leaned forward, a malicious smile creeping into his lips, are hunted down like rabid dogs and beheaded. Rabinoe felt the cold sweat return, beating heavily and running down the small of his back. He dared not to say anything, sensing a dangerously pivotal moment. He simply swallowed hard and stared at the steps before him, feeling the color drain from his face. As it stands, the king continued, you have been practicing your craft across the southern reaches of Galita without the sanction of the crown. My king, Rabinoe said, my deepest apologies, but I did not know. It figures that your master, one who refused to bow his head to me, would keep you ignorant of these laws, the king snarled. But your ignorance can only be forgiven so far. Truly, my lord, Rabinoe said, I only meant to help people. I have offered my services free of charge and have not taken advantage of anyone I have come across. Oh, the king said, I am well aware of what you have been up to since you left the chateau. The reverberations from your castings have been felt by my mages. That is how Dirkley was able to track you down so effectively. I did not know I was creating such a fuss, my king, Rabinoe said. I apologize for any trouble I have caused you. I am outraged that a mage such as yourself would willingly practice his craft without the knowledge or approval of the crown. Rabinoe opened his mouth to apologize once more, but the king raised a hand to cut him off. Given your ignorance of the laws of the land you live in, the king began, I am willing to be benevolent and forego any punishment I would have levied upon you. Rabinoe swallowed, feeling something worse coming his way. However, the king said, smiling cruelly, you have two choices before you now. First, you give up your craft and live the rest of your life as a mundane human. The second, you accept my generous offer and become a mage for the crown. Rabinoe looked up at the man sharply. My king? A mage for the crown? Oh, yes, he said, his wicked smile growing wider. You will be allowed to continue your humble pilgrimage and allowed to continue practicing your craft. However, he leaned forward, whenever I call upon your services, you are to drop everything you are doing and heed my commands. And there it was. Rabinoe frowned and looked back down at the steps before him, weighing his options. He knew, deep in his heart, will magic was his calling. From the moment Linrem took him in as a small child, Rabinoe set the goal in his mind to be the best will mage there ever was. To stop practicing will magic would be akin to slicing off one of his arms. Sure, he could get by without it, but what kind of life would there be left to live for him? However, Rabinoe also knew the king's offer was hardly more than accepting chains around his ankles. The king also did not say what kind of commands he would be levying towards Rabinoe. What if he commanded him to do something that he could not or would not do? Yet the other option, the other alternative, would be to spit in this man's face and accept death. Rabinoe did not like his options. A deep yearning in his heart wished Linram were here to give him guidance. However, he had an idea of what the wily old mage would have said to him. Rabinoe had fallen headfirst into the most lethal of traps. His only option was to go with the flow until the opportunity to escape presented itself. Rabinoe swallowed hard and looked up at the king. "My king, I accept your humble offer. I agree to become a will mage for the crown." King Lance's wicked smile grew even wider. "Good boy! And what about you, Eris the Eternal? Do you accept young Mr. Jenkins' decision?" Eris stiffened, looking up at the king with dark eyes. "With all due respect, your kingship, I do not have a choice in this matter. My fate is shackled to Rabinoe's. Wherever he goes, I go. Whatever he does, I will guide him. If he has chosen this path, then it is my duty to walk it alongside him." The king laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that held little mirth. "Excellent!" He stood, holding his arms out wide. "Then it is decided. Young Magister Rabinoe Jenkins is hereforth a will mage for the crown of Galita. Dirkley!" "Yes, my king." Dirkley's head hadn't even raised from its bowed position. "Ensure that the young magister has all the tools he needs," King Lance commanded, "and give him the information he will need to answer my calls." "It will be done, my king." "Excellent." Lance E. Lateral sat back down in his golden throne. "I declare this meeting adjourned." Rabinoe bowed his head once more, then stood and followed Dirkley back down the hall. As they reached the far end, the king called out once more, "Oh, and Jenkins!" Rabinoe turned, facing the man. "If the kingdom ever faces times of war while you are in my employ," he said with twinkling eyes, "I fully expect you to fight for my banner." Rabinoe felt the blood drain from his face one last time. He stammered. "I understand, my king." "Wonderful!" King Lance laughed his mirthless laugh once more. "Now be gone!" Dirkley led Rabinoe and Eris, who had returned to her perch on Rabinoe's shoulders, back out through the main hall and out to the murky, cloudy skies beyond. He took him over to where Rabinoe had handed over his handcart, turning to face him as they arrived. He reached into his satchel that was tucked within his chest plate and emerged with two items: a folded-up piece of parchment and a silver medallion on a silver chain. He handed both of these items to Rabinoe. "The medallion is how the king will communicate with you," Dirkley explained. "When he has orders for you, the medallion will grow hot, chime, and begin to vibrate. When that happens, you are to immediately head to the nearest city large enough to have a royal telegram station. You will send word of your location and await your orders. This medallion is to be worn at all times." "How will I know where to go?" Rabinoe asked, eyeing the medallion like he had just been handed an angry and venomous snake. "That is where this comes in," Dirkly tapped the parchment. It is a map of Galita, clearly marked with every telegram station in the Empire. You will locate the nearest one and head there immediately. Is that understood? Rabinoe unfolded the parchment and looked at the map, nodding. So, he said slowly, what do I do now? Dirkly scoffed. I don't give a shit what you do, he said harshly, as long as you never ignore your master's summons. If you do, the next time you see me, it will be the moment you take your last breath. Dirkly let the threat hang in the air as he turned and stalked back towards the castle. The guards who had taken custody of his handcart wheeled it out to him. The effort it took them to move the hellish wheels brought Rabinoe a modicum of comfort. He placed the medallion around his neck, tucking the pendant into his shirt and out of sight. He then folded up the map and tucked it safely away. Rabinoe stepped up to his cart, grabbing the handles, and made the wheels round before he began walking off. The pair were a day and a half away from Ohangpur, heading back to the place where Dirkly had gotten the drop on them, before either of them said anything at all. That went well, Rabinoe said, dryly. At least you still have your head, Eris responded, and all of your limbs. I'd call that a win. Yeah, Rabinoe said, but now I'm a slave to the crown. It's better than being dead, Eris hissed. Besides, I think you handled that as well as you could have, given the circumstances. I didn't really have a choice, Rabinoe said sadly. King Lauderell played his hand perfectly. The man laid a trap, and I walked straight into it. That may be true, Eris conceded, but considering how much trouble Lyn gave the royal family over the centuries, the fact that he didn't simply take out his anger on you is a cause for celebration. I suppose so, Rabinoe said morosely. I just can't help but feel like Lyn would have found some way to get out of that situation. Lyn had centuries of experience, Eris shot back. And don't forget that he, too, was once a mage for the crown. Yeah, Rabinoe agreed, but I also think he had more of a choice in the matter. A moot point, Eris said airily. You survived your first encounter with the king, and he has allowed you to continue your pilgrimage. Take the good with the bad, Rabbit. You did well. Eris smiled at that. Rabinoe smiled at that. Compliments from the eternal cat were few and far between. Thanks, Eris. It is simply the truth, she said. Now let us make haste and return to where we were before that awful man took us into custody. They walked on in silence, though the mood was noticeably brighter. Despite all that had occurred in the royal capital, Rabinoe felt like his master would be smiling proudly upon him. He had accepted the yoke of servitude, but he would find a way to break it. End. Episode 19. Royal Proclamation. Thank you for listening and watching. If you enjoy, I'll be releasing new episodes every Monday at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.